Looking back now, I can see the signs were there from the beginning. Not in bold, flashing letters, but in the quieter moments, the pauses in her speech, the way her eyes flickered away when she was pressed too closely. At the time, though, I didn't want to notice. I wanted her. No, I needed her to be perfect. Her name was Elise. I met her at a friend's party, one of those evenings that began awkwardly and ended in drunken laughter. She was leaning against the kitchen counter, sipping wine and looking as though the world bored her. When our eyes met, I felt that rare jolt, the sense of recognition that fools you into believing fate has just tapped you on the shoulder. She wasn't classically beautiful, not in the way magazines would dictate, but she had something more dangerous, presence. When she spoke, the room leaned toward her. When she smiled, you wanted to earn it again and again. She had that restless energy of someone who had already lived 3 different lives and was halfway into the fourth. And me? I was just a man who wanted to be chosen. We talked for hours that night, huddled away from the noise of the party. She told me she had studied abroad in Paris, that she had once dreamed of becoming a painter, that she now worked in a small gallery downtown. Her voice carried a mix of ambition and disappointment, like someone who had tasted enough of the world to know how bitter it could be. I found myself confessing things I hadn't said to anyone in years, old regrets, half-formed hopes. When the night ended, she touched my hand lightly, and I knew I'd be chasing that touch for a long time. Our first weeks together were a whirlwind. She had a way of making ordinary moments feel cinematic. Coffee dates turned into deep conversations about art and memory. Simple walks became adventures. She would stop mid-step to notice the way the light fell on a brick wall or how the wind curled through the leaves, and suddenly I'd be seeing it too, as though she had lent me her eyes. I thought that was love, seeing the world brighter because she was in it. But there were shadows too. She had moods that shifted like weather, storms that arrived without warning. Sometimes she would vanish into herself for hours, unreachable, her phone turned off, her door locked. She'd emerge later with a forced smile, dismissing my concern with a vague excuse about being tired. I told myself it was part of her mystery, part of the price of loving someone extraordinary. The first real crack appeared one late evening. We had gone out for drinks and she'd had more than usual. On the way home, she pulled out her phone, laughed at a message, and quickly turned the screen away from me. I asked who it was, half joking. Her smile vanished and she snapped, "No one." The sharpness in her tone startled me. The air between us thickened, and though she softened a moment later, wrapping her arm around mine, I couldn't shake the chill. I told myself not to overthink it. But that night, lying awake beside her, I felt the old ache of doubt rising in my chest. Over time, the inconsistencies multiplied. She'd cancel plans at the last minute with vague explanations. She'd go quiet for days, only to reappear with a flood of affection that washed away my frustration. She knew how to disarm me, how to make me believe I was the center of her world, until the next time she drifted away. It was a cycle I recognized even as I refused to name it. My friends noticed. They asked questions, hinted at their concerns, but I defended her every time. "You don't know her like I do," I'd say, as though intimacy could erase suspicion. The truth was I didn't know her either. Not really. I knew only the version she allowed me to see. Then came the night that would change everything. She had invited me to her gallery after hours, promising a surprise. I arrived to find the lights dimmed, candles flickering against the white walls, and a bottle of wine waiting. She looked radiant, her eyes brighter than I'd ever seen them. "I wanted this to be ours," she said, kissing me deeply. But just as I began to surrender to the moment, I noticed something strange. A jacket draped casually over a chair. Not mine, not hers either. Too large, too masculine. I asked lightly at first if someone else had been there. She hesitated, just long enough for the truth to glimmer behind her silence, before she smiled and said it belonged to a coworker who had left it behind. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but inside something cracked. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was a fracture in the story she had woven around us. And once something cracks, it never really stops breaking. That night, as she leaned against me, whispering things I wanted so desperately to believe, I felt both intoxicated and trapped. I knew then that I was standing on the edge of something darker, something that would demand more of me than I was ready to give. And though I couldn't admit it yet, part of me already understood. Elise was not going to save me. She was going to destroy me. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. That's what love does. It convinces you to doubt your instincts, to dismiss the warnings that echo in your chest. Elise had a way of making my doubts feel small, almost ridiculous. With a glance, a smile, a touch, she could erase hours of suspicion. And I wanted so badly to be erased. Weeks passed in a haze of closeness and distance. Some days she was radiant, laughing with me, sharing secrets as though I were the only one she trusted. Other days she drifted, her eyes unfocused, her phone clutched too tightly in her hand. I started to notice patterns, calls she ignored when I was near, texts she read but didn't answer until later when she thought I wasn't paying attention. The jacket at the gallery had been the first visible clue, but there were others, subtle and sharp like shards of glass hidden beneath the surface. One Saturday afternoon, we planned to meet for brunch. She canceled last minute, claiming she wasn't feeling well. Something about the way she said it set me on edge. My chest tightened with unease, and for the first time I let the darker impulse win. I went to her gallery unannounced. The doors were locked, but through the window I saw her. She wasn't alone. A man stood close beside her, their shoulders nearly touching as they looked at something on the wall. She laughed at something he said, a laugh that sounded too unguarded, too real. I told myself it was professional, that she worked with artists all the time. But when she spotted me through the glass, her expression froze, and in that flicker of panic I saw what I had been trying to deny. She rushed outside, explaining that the man was a client, nothing more, but her words came too fast, too rehearsed. I didn't argue. I nodded, smiled, pretended to accept her explanation. But inside, a storm was building. That night, lying awake, I realized how far I had already fallen. Love, I discovered, is not always a gentle descent. Sometimes it's a plunge into darkness, where every truth you uncover feels like another stone pulling you under. The weeks that followed were a blur of suspicion and desire. I should have walked away. Anyone with sense would have. But Elise had hooked me with something stronger than logic. Every time I thought of leaving, she drew me back with a look, a kiss, a moment of tenderness that felt almost sacred. It was as though she knew exactly how to keep me tethered, dangling between devotion and doubt. Then came the night that stripped away the last of my illusions. She invited me to her apartment for dinner. I arrived early, flowers in hand, hopping to surprise her. As I approached the door, I heard voices inside, hers and another man. My heart pounded. I told myself I should leave, but I couldn't. I stood there, frozen, listening. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard enough. The intimacy in her tone, the laughter, the way his voice softened when he said her name. It was the sound of a world I wasn't part of. My hands trembled as I knocked. Silence fell inside. A moment later, she opened the door, her smile tight, her eyes darting nervously. She said I was early, too early, that she wasn't ready yet. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of him, tall, broad-shouldered, slipping quietly into the bedroom. The lie came quickly. "That's just my cousin," she said, too lightly, as though mocking my suspicion. I wanted to believe her, wanted to let the lie cover me like a blanket. But something in her eyes betrayed her, a flicker of fear she couldn't hide. I stayed anyway. We ate dinner, made small talk, pretended everything was normal. But the air was thick with what had just happened. When I left that night, the streets felt colder, harsher. I walked for hours, replaying every moment in my head. Why didn't I leave then? Because love had already become something else. It wasn't affection anymore, it was addiction. I craved her the way a drowning man craves air, even knowing it might kill him. The days grew heavier after that. She was slipping from me, even as she clung tighter. There were apologies, long nights tangled in sheets, promises whispered in the dark. She swore I was the only one, that I was everything. And though part of me knew it was a lie, another part clung to those words like they were the only thing keeping me alive. One evening, while she slept beside me, her phone buzzed. I shouldn't have looked. I knew it would ruin me. But temptation won. The message on the screen was simple, intimate, undeniable. I miss you already. My chest hollowed out as though the words had carved me open. Still, I didn't wake her. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing. For the first time, I understood that betrayal is not a single act. It's 1,000 small cuts, each one deeper than the last, until you no longer know where the bleeding began. And still I stayed. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing is not that someone lies to you. It's that you choose to believe them anyway. The night I saw that message on her phone was the night my heart began to harden. But instead of ending things, I convinced myself I needed proof, something undeniable, something I couldn't explain away in the fog of my own longing. It wasn't enough to know. I wanted to see. Maybe some sick part of me believed that if I could just confront her with the truth, she'd finally admit it and we could start again, clean. Or maybe I simply needed her to hurt me openly, so I could stop hurting myself in silence. From that point on, I became someone I barely recognized. I found myself checking her social media for hints, memorizing her schedule, noticing the smallest inconsistencies. I told myself it was protection, but it was obsession. Love had curdled into something toxic, something restless and desperate. One Friday evening, she told me she was working late at the gallery. I offered to bring her dinner, but she declined too quickly. My stomach twisted. Against my better judgment, I drove downtown anyway, parking across the street from the gallery. The lights inside glowed soft and golden, spilling into the night. Through the wide front windows, I saw her. She wasn't alone. The man I'd glimpsed before, the tall one, broad-shouldered, was there again. They stood close, far too close for colleagues. She leaned against a pedestal, tilting her head in that way she did when she was completely present, completely captivated. That was what cut deepest, the look on her face. It was the same look she had given me in the early days when I thought I was her discovery, her miracle. Now it was his. I sat in the car for nearly an hour, watching them move around the space, laughing, sometimes brushing against each other as if by accident. My chest ached, but I couldn't tear myself away. When they finally left together, slipping into the night side by side, I stayed behind in the dark, alone with my hollow victory. The proof was mine now, but it didn't bring the relief I thought it would. Instead, it hollowed me out even more. I didn't confront her right away. I couldn't. The fear of losing her entirely was stronger than the pain of knowing the truth. So I played along. When we met the next day, I smiled, I touched her hand, I let her kiss me. All the while, the image of her laughing with him burned like fire behind my eyes. But cracks like that can't be plastered over. They spread, they widen, and soon they swallow everything. The confrontation came a week later. I hadn't planned it, but emotion doesn't wait for permission. We were in her apartment, the smell of coffee lingering in the air, sunlight spilling across the floor. I looked at her, really looked at her, and the words tore out of me before I could stop them. "Who is he?" Her face shifted, surprise, then calculation, then the mask of calm she wore so well. "What are you talking about?" she asked, too softly. "The man at the gallery, the one you laugh with when you think I'm not there." Silence. She held my gaze, her eyes searching mine, perhaps looking for how much I already knew. And then, instead of denial, she laughed, low, sharp, almost cruel. "You shouldn't spy on me," she said. "It doesn't suit you." The room tilted. I felt anger surge, but beneath it was something worse, humiliation. She wasn't even sorry, not enough to pretend, not enough to soothe me with lies. She had chosen exposure over comfort, and that choice cut deeper than any betrayal. "Do you love him?" I asked, my voice breaking. Her expression softened then, as if she pitied me. "I love parts of him," she said, "just like I love parts of you, but no one gets all of me, not anymore." Those words echoed inside me like a death sentence. No one gets all of me. I realized then that I had fallen in love with a ghost, a woman who only ever gave fragments of herself, never the whole. And I had built my entire heart around those fragments, mistaking them for the whole truth. I left that day, slamming the door behind me, my chest burning. For days, I didn't answer her calls. I walked the city streets like a stranger, everything blurred by the weight of betrayal. But Elise had a way of pulling me back even then. She showed up at my apartment one night, rain-soaked, eyes wild. She said she needed me, that I was the only one who truly understood her. She swore the other man meant nothing, that she had ended it. And God help me, I let her in. Her wet hair dripped onto my floor, her hands clung to me as though I were air itself. We fell into each other with a hunger that was more about pain than passion. I knew she was lying. I knew she would hurt me again. And yet, I chose her. Because sometimes the greatest betrayal is not what someone does to you. It's what you allow them to do, again and again, while pretending you don't already know the ending. The weeks after she returned to me were like living in two different worlds. By day, I moved through life in a daze, working, eating, speaking, while my mind replayed every glance, every silence, every half-truth she gave me. By night, I was hers again, body and soul, as though the past hadn't happened. She had a way of folding herself into me, whispering that I was enough, that I was her anchor, her safe place. And I wanted so badly to believe that I clung to those words as if they were salvation. The cracks only deepened. She was restless, always restless. One evening she suggested we take a trip together, something to reignite what she claimed had been lost. We drove up the coast, staying in a small inn by the water. For a few days I almost convinced myself the storm had passed. We walked along the cliffs, drank wine under the stars, laughed until our sides hurt. She reached for my hand, and for fleeting moments I felt like I had her again. The whole her, not just the fragments. But reality has a cruel way of seeping in, no matter how tightly you try to seal the cracks. On the last night of the trip, while she showered, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I told myself not to look. I even turned away, staring out the window at the waves crashing against the rocks. But temptation gnawed at me. My hand moved before my conscience could stop it. The message was from him. Not just any message, it was a photo. The two of them together, smiling, intimate, taken only days before. His caption read, "Wish you were here tonight instead." The walls of the room seemed to close in on me. My breath came shallow. I dropped the phone back on the table as though it had burned me. When she stepped out of the bathroom, steam curling around her, she smiled, wrapped in a towel, and for the first time I saw her not as a lover but as a stranger who had been living in my life like an actor on a stage. I said nothing. I couldn't. The silence between us was deafening. That night, while she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling until dawn, listening to the sea crash against the shore, each wave sounding like another truth I had refused to face. When we returned home, I tried to pull away. I stopped calling, stopped answering so quickly. But Elise was relentless. She came to my door, sent letters, left voicemails filled with apologies and declarations. She told me I was her future, that she would change, that what we had was too rare to throw away. And then, just as I thought I might finally break free, she changed tactics. It was a late evening, and she appeared outside my building, her eyes red, her hands trembling. She told me she was pregnant. The world tilted. My heart slammed against my ribs, torn between fear and hope. Could it be mine? I asked, and she nodded, swearing through tears that it was. She said the other man was gone, that she had chosen me, that she wanted to build a life together. In that moment, every instinct screamed at me not to trust her, not to surrender again. But the thought of a child, our child, was a chain heavier than any lie. Against reason, against pride, against every scar she had left on me, I let her back into my life. The weeks that followed were surreal. She was tender again, almost glowing, and for a time I believed we had crossed into something new. We talked about baby names, about moving in together, about futures that felt almost possible. I let myself dream again, though deep down, doubt never loosened its grip. Then came the call. I was at work when my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a man's voice came through, calm, steady, devastating. It was him, the other man. "I think you should know," he said. "She told me she's pregnant too, and she swears it's mine." The world went silent. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I left work without a word, driving aimlessly until I found myself parked by the river, staring at the water as though it might give me answers. My hands shook on the steering wheel, my body hollowed out by a betrayal so profound it felt almost unreal. That night I confronted her. She didn't deny it. She cried, begged, pleaded, swore she was confused, that she loved us both, that she didn't know whose child it was. Her words spilled like poison, and for the first time I saw them for what they were. Not love, not even lies, but desperation. I left her standing there in tears, my chest aching with a mixture of rage and grief. For days I wandered the city, barely eating, barely sleeping, haunted by everything we had been and everything we had lost. I thought that was the end, that I had finally escaped her gravity. But Elise wasn't finished with me yet. She came back into my life one last time, though not in the way I expected. It was a gray morning when I opened my door to find her standing there, pale, hollow-eyed, as though sleep had abandoned her. She didn't speak at first, just stood there trembling, hands clenched into fists. Finally, she whispered, "I lost the baby." The words struck me like a blow. For a long moment I felt nothing but emptiness. Relief, grief, disbelief, they all mingled until I couldn't tell them apart. She stepped past me without asking, collapsing onto my couch, sobbing into her hands. And though I wanted to keep my distance, I found myself sitting beside her, my hand hovering near her shoulder, not quite touching. In between sobs, she confessed more than she ever had before. She admitted she had been torn between us, unable to let either man go, addicted to the way we both loved her. She said she hadn't known whose child it was, but she had hoped it was mine. "Because you're the only one who ever saw me," she whispered, her voice raw. "Not just the pretty parts. You saw all of me." For a moment, I almost believed her. But then I remembered every lie, every betrayal, every night spent staring at the ceiling while she was in someone else's arms. I realized that even in this moment of supposed honesty, she was performing, telling me just enough to keep me tethered. I told her I couldn't do it anymore, that whatever we had, whatever we thought we had, it was finished. My voice shook, but the words were firm. She stared at me as though I had struck her, her tears stopping mid-breath. For the first time, she looked small. "Don't say that," she whispered. "You don't mean it." But I did. I meant it with every scar she had carved into me. I told her she needed to leave. She begged, clung to my arm, tried to remind me of the nights we had shared, the dreams we had spoken aloud. But I pulled away. When she finally walked out that door, she didn't look back, and I didn't chase her. The days that followed were brutal. I felt like a man learning to walk after years of injury, unsteady, uncertain, raw. The silence was both a wound and a balm. No more late-night calls, no more lies whispered like promises. Just me, alone with my thoughts, forced to reckon with the wreckage of what I had allowed. Weeks later, I heard she had left town. Some said she went back to him. Others said she vanished entirely, starting fresh in another city. I didn't try to find out. For the first time in years, I stopped needing answers from her. And yet I won't pretend the story ended cleanly. There are nights when I still dream of her, her laughter, the way her eyes lit up when she wanted something, the way she made me feel like the only man in the room. I wake up with my chest tight, torn between longing and rage. Love like that doesn't just vanish. It leaves its mark, etched deep into your bones. Sometimes when I pass the gallery where she once worked, I pause at the window, staring at the empty space inside. I imagine her there, smiling at some new stranger, weaving the same spell she once cast on me. And though part of me still aches, another part finally understands. It was never really me she loved. It was the attention, the devotion, the reflection of herself she found in my eyes. What I mistook for love was a hunger she could never satisfy. And what I called devotion was just fear. fear of being alone, fear of letting go. Looking back, I don't hate her. I don't even hate him, the man who stood beside her in the shadows. What I hate is how long it took me to see the truth. That betrayal isn't always a knife in the back. Sometimes it's a hand you keep holding, even as it drags you under. Now, when I think of Elise, I feel something closer to silence than sorrow. She was a storm I stepped into willingly, blind to the wreckage it would leave behind. And though part of me will always carry her, I know now that survival means stepping out of the storm, even if you limp away soaked and broken. Because love, real love, doesn't leave you doubting your own worth. It doesn't splinter you into fragments, forcing you to cling to pieces. It steadies you, even when life shakes. It builds instead of burns. I'm still searching for that kind of love. Maybe I always will be, but at least now I know the difference. And that knowledge, painful as it was to earn, is the only gift Elise ever truly gave me.